Morning. This is Jamie Curley from Vermont Agency of Education Child Nutrition Programs, and I'm joined by my coworker Denise Blankenship, and we are going to be presenting on the verification process. So could you all just do me a favor and hit the little raise hand button to let me know if you can hear me all right? Okay, I see a few hands. All right. Thank you guys. And you can put your hands down. I appreciate it. So this is the webinar on the verification process. This will be the same as the presentation that was given at the Summer Institute conference. This webinar will be recorded so that you will be able to view it at a later date, and we will send out information about the viewing sometime next week. And throughout the presentation, if you have questions, you can type them into the chat box, and then my coworker Denise will let me know when you guys have questions, and we can address those. If you have a really burning question, we can address that as we go along, or we can save that till the end and sort of have a question period. All right. Okay. This is just a brief overview of some of the topics that we're going to cover today. We're going to discuss the ramp up to the verification process, how to close out the verification process, and then we're going to look over the verification report and talk about some of the fields in that. The purpose of the verification process is that it's a piece of the overall eligibility certification process. And it's where a sample of applications are selected and the household provides backup documentation to validate or certify or verify the income or the information that they reported on their applications, which is typically taken at face value. So basically, the difference between the eligibility certification process and the particular verification process is that during eligibility certification, when a household submits an application, it's approved based on face value. They don't have to provide backup documentation for the information that they're reporting. They only have to provide that backup documentation if they are selected as part of the verification process. So it's a very small handful of the overall amount of applications that you receive. One of the things that we have seen going out on reviews and just in discussing best practices with different school food authorities is that centralizing eligibility certification has been a really beneficial practice for folks. It allows more coordination of eligibility determination, and it's really beneficial for the verification process in particular. This is not required, of course. It's just something that we highly recommend. The verification process is performed at a school food authority level. So even if your applications are all being approved at your site or school level, verification is still done based on the applications for the entire SFA. So it does involve school-to-school coordination. I just want to make a note here that I think it's really important to remember that even though in Vermont the state pays the household contribution of 30 cents for breakfast for a reduced price meal and 40 cents for lunch for a reduced price meal so that those households can receive meals at no cost, we or you from the federal government still receive reimbursement based on a free and reduced paid status. So it's really important that when we're approving applications during the eligibility certification process and during verification that we're ensuring the distinction between a free and reduced price application because it still has consequences on the funding and reimbursement side of things, even though the household wouldn't necessarily see a difference because they don't have to pay anything if they're reduced price status. The verification process is not required for everyone, and these are the few exceptions. It's not required for students who are directly certified, because we already essentially have that backup documentation or backup proof from that higher authority, not from the household, to certify that that family is, or that child is eligible for free meals. Students in an RCCI, which is a residential child care institution, except for if there are day students at that RCCI. And this really doesn't apply to that many folks because we only have a handful of RCCIs that currently participate in our programs. We have New England Kern-Hatton Homes. We have Vermont Permanency Initiative. And I am looking for my note on who our third one is, and Windsor County Youth Services. So it really doesn't apply to that many people. Verification is also not required for schools operating the community eligibility provision. For schools with provision to breakfast and lunch, except for schools in their base year because they are collecting applications during that initial year. And then schools with non-pricing programs that claim only paid meal reimbursement. And that particular situation does not currently apply to anybody in our state. So even when the verification process is not required, the verification report is required. So for all those exceptions I just mentioned, those folks still have to complete the verification report. And that's because the USDA uses this report as a tool to collect other statistical and data information about your student breakdown. This is a federal requirement. It's not a state-specific decision to mandate that this report is required for everyone. The only exception for completing the verification report is for school food authorities or schools that only participate in the special milk program. And again, this is really a handful of folks in the state that have opted not to offer their students the benefits of a school breakfast or a school lunch and only to participate in the special milk program. So some of the main resources that will be helpful to you during the verification process can be found on our child nutrition webpage. And I'll show you the webpage in a minute. But we've really made a concerted effort to try and get some more materials up there for folks to make sure that it's a robust resource for you. And one of the best reference tools we have is the eligibility manual for school meals. And it's for determining and verifying eligibility. This goes over all of the requirements for folks completing a free reduced price meal application, for approving it, notifying households, carryover time periods, special scenarios, and it goes over the verification process. This is, if you guys have questions for us, often the first place we turn, we're like, okay, is this covered in the eligibility manual? Then the income eligibility guidelines for 2019-2020, and making sure that you are indeed using the current year eligibility guidelines for this process. Our free reduced price meal webpage also contains our Vermont specific version of the application for free reduced price meals. It is Vermont specific because in Vermont, SNAP, which is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly known as food stamps, is referred to as 3 Squares VT. And TANF, which is Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, formerly welfare, is referred to as Reach Up in Vermont. So we just make sure that we have the Vermont terminology on there so folks are more familiar with that language. We also have the household letter and instructions that accompany the application and explain to folks how to fill it out, the notice of approval or denial of benefits. And then for verification, we have the verification notice letter to inform households that they've been selected for this process. and then a results letter, which informs them whether or not, based on this process, their benefit status has changed or stayed the same. And just as I mentioned, the eligibility manual has a lot of like special scenarios and key terms, and goes over the acceptable documentation that can be submitted as part of verification. The income eligibility guidelines are broken into folks that are approved for free meals and approved for reduced price meals based on their income. The free categories based on 130% of federal poverty level, and reduced price categories based on 185% of federal poverty. Please do not use the guidelines on the back of the free reduced price meal application when you're approving applications or when you're doing verification, because these only contain the reduced price guidelines, which act as a framework for households so they know whether or not it's worth it for them to complete the application. Folks can be approved for free meals if they participate in SNAP 3 Squares VT or TANF/REACH-UP, if they provide a case number, the student name, and an adult and the household signature. That's a complete application for categorical eligibility. As well as if they check off that they're homeless, migrant, or foster. Those are complete applications as well and can be approved for free meals. And when a child's name is found on the list that comes from the state for participation in 3 Squares VT or REACH-UP, that is when they are directly certified for meals, because the documentation or the determination isn't coming from the household, it's coming from this higher authority of our coordination with Department of Children and Families. As well as if you get the homeless, migrant, or foster designation from a homeless liaison in your SFA, or from the migrant coordinator at AOE, or from our liaison here with DCF, or from a court foster body, that is also directly certifying, because there's no higher proof that you would get than that. Here is a timeline of verification. These are some key dates. Verification will begin as of October 1st. So you're going to be looking at the number of approved applications you have on file SFA-wide as of October 1st. We're going to complete the verification process. You're going to have reached out to the households, you're going to have looked at their documentation, you're going to have determined whether or not their status changes, all of those steps by November 15th. And you are going to complete your verification report by December 15th. If you would like to request an extension past that November 15th deadline, you may do so in writing to Rosie Kruger, who is our State Director for Child Nutrition Programs. And we can approve an extension up to December 15th if there is a really good reason. So due to natural disaster, civil disorder, strike, or other significant circumstances which have delayed your ability to complete the verification process. Any extension past that December 15th deadline has to be submitted by us up to our Northeast Regional Office in Boston for their approval. I just want to make a note that during the eligibility certification process and during verification, it's really important to keep all of this information confidential. You're dealing with some sensitive information, and it should be kept strictly among those folks that need to know it in order to get that benefit to those children, as well as when you are actually providing that benefit, making sure that you're preventing over identification and maintaining confidentiality in all steps. Make sure that you are documenting all steps of verification and of your eligibility certification process. If you get an application from a household and it's missing a piece of information, that you need to approve it, and you call them and get that information. You need to document on the application or somewhere, on 8/25, talked to blah, blah, blah in this household, so that you have a running record of that conversation, because if it's not written down, it didn't happen. This is the same with the verification process. Make sure that all communication is documented so that you have a record. The key personnel involved in this process are the determining official, and I apologize, this should also say the confirmation official, the verification official, and the hearing official. The determining official is that person that goes over the free and reduced price meal application and approves it. So they're the ones saying, this is approved for free, this is approved for reduced, or this is denied and they should be paid status. They're responsible for making sure the household's notified, for tracking that student's benefit status, so either through like a master list roster or Excel document, or if your student data management system has that capability. And then making sure that the benefit is communicated to food service and actually put on to your benefit issuance list, however that's done, so that when a student goes to the line and goes to the POS, their meal is being counted at the correct rate. I'm just going to skip this. I apologize. The confirmation official must be a person that is different than the determining official, and they are the ones that are responsible for making sure that the application was approved correctly for free reduced price meals prior to household notification during the verification process. So they're a second set of eyes saying, yep, this was approved correctly, or, no, there was human error and this wasn't done right. The verification official is the person that is responsible for the verification process. They establish the sample pool, they select the sample size, they communicate with the households, make any necessary changes to benefit status, and they're responsible for completing the verification report. The determining official and the verification official can be the same person. The determining official and the confirmation official cannot be the same person. So this is that second set of eyes. This is somebody else that's looking at your work and saying, oh yeah, you approved that application correctly, or no, you didn't. So those folks have to be different. But the confirmation official and the verification official could be the same person. It just depends on, the structure of your SFA and who's available to fill these roles. I will also just point out, I know, sometimes folks get confused because we use the term confirmation official when we're talking about the verification process and when we're talking about the independent review of applications. I'm not going to talk about the independent review of applications at all during this presentation. I just want to really go over it quickly here in case folks are getting confused. The independent review of applications is when folks are reviewed by us during an administrative review, and we find a lot of problems with your application approval process. And the corrective action is that you designate a person to look at every single application to make sure it was approved correctly prior to notifying the household. That is when you are put on what we call the independent review list. During the verification process, that confirmation official is only looking at the handful of applications that were selected for verification to make sure they're approved correctly. They're not looking at every single application. Okay. You are also required to have someone be designated the hearing official. And the hearing official is the person who presides over a household's appeal of the verification decision. This role is typically filled by the superintendent. They're typically the hearing official during the overall eligibility certification process as well, if folks want to appeal the approval or denial of their free and reduced price meal application. Okay, so during the verification process, we have what's called a sample pool of applications, and we have our sample size of applications. The sample pool is the total number of approved applications on file as of October 1st. And again, this is an SFA or School Food Authority wide number. The sample size is the number of applications that's subject to verification, and it's 3% of the sample pool. And then those applications are selected from the error-prone applications. So again, your sample pool is the actual number of approved, not incomplete, not denied, but approved applications on file as of October 1st. And this is the number of applications, not the number of students on the applications. And Denise is letting me know that we have a question. Would you read that off for me, Denise, or read those off for me?
If someone checks homeless, does it have to be verified by the liaison?
That's a great question. So it does not have to be verified by the homeless liaison. You might want to communicate with the homeless liaison to make sure that they are aware that this student or this household is homeless, to make sure that they're getting all of those other benefits from that homeless status. And then if you have the homeless liaison send you something in writing that they are homeless, you don't need to verify that application. If you were to pull that application during the verification process, you could then check with the homeless liaison.
This is not including CEP and provision schools, correct?
Correct. So community eligibility provision schools are not subject to verification. If you have a school food authority that has all CEP schools, you would not be doing this process at all except for completing the report. However, if you had a mixture, like some schools are CEP and some schools are not, you'd need to complete this process for your standard meal counting and claiming sites that are collecting applications. And then if you have a Provision 2 school in its base year, which is when you're collecting applications, you will need to complete verification. If your Provision 2 school is not in its base year, you won't. If you have a Provision 2 school that only does Provision 2 breakfast, it doesn't do breakfast and lunch, you will need to complete verification. So I'm just going to repeat that we had two questions so far. One was asking about communication with a homeless liaison when you receive an application that says it's homeless, and I was just saying that you can approve that application based on that face value that they're homeless and they'll get free meals, but that it's really beneficial to communicate with a homeless liaison because that household may be entitled to receive other benefits if that homeless liaison is not aware that that student is homeless. And then the next question was about whether or not verification is applicable to CEP and Provision 2 schools. So I was just explaining that if it is a CEP school, they do not have to do verification, and if it's a Provision 2 school for breakfast and lunch not in its base year, they don't have to do verification.
And do we round up or down?
Great question. So Denise just read off another question that was, do we round up or down? You always round up. So thank you. And we will talk about that more in a minute. Great questions, guys. Thank you. Okay. So when you are creating your sample pool of your applications on file as of October 1st, you are going to remove applications that qualify via direct certification. So if you have an application that has a case number that you found on your DC list, you will remove that from your sample pool. If you have an application that has a case number that's not on your DC list, you will keep that in your sample pool. And as I said before, if they are certified some other way, you can remove that when you're creating your sample pool. So like if you have the letter from our migrant coordinator at AOE that says this child is a migrant student, and you also have an application, that migrant letter is going to supersede that application. So you're going to remove it when creating your sample pool. You're not going to get rid of those applications. You're just kind of going to set them aside. One of the sort of special scenarios that arises during application approval is what's often referred to as administrative approval. And this is where applications are completed by school officials on behalf of the household, and these are excluded from the verification process. I don't want to go into too much detail about these, but I will just say that this is covered in the eligibility manual, and it's really important that the official communicates or reports on the application as much information as possible and how they know that information about the household. And you are still required to notify the household that they've been approved for free meals, so that they have the opportunity to deny that benefit. I will just also put in my personal caution that this can be sort of a slippery slope of application approval, so to use this process judiciously. As of or starting in school year 2018-2019, every school food authority is required to use what's called the standard method of verification, and that's what's called error-prone verification. And we'll talk more about what error-prone is. When you are pulling your sample size, applications may be replaced when the school food authority believes that the household would be unable to respond to the verification request. So I guess this would be if you pull an application and you groan immediately, like it took us, the jaws of life to get this household to complete this application correctly, and some other information that would make it really difficult to complete the verification process, you may replace that application. There are specific requirements when replacing applications. You may replace up to 5% of applications selected, and if 5% of total applications results in less than one application may still be replaced. And all results of the 5% are rounded up to the next whole number. And that replacing takes place after that confirmation review. So for that sample size, it is always rounded up, so it's 3%, but if 3% is like 2.4, you're going to round it up to 3 applications. You must verify a minimum of 1 application, and don't verify more or less applications than required except for verification for cause, which I'll talk about later. And you're not going to verify all of your applications. So just to give an example, if your sample pool is 96 approved applications on file as of October 1st, you do 96 times 0.03, that's 2.88, and you round that up to 3. So you're going to select 3 applications, and you're going to select those from your error-prone applications. However, if you don't have enough error-prone applications to meet that sample size, you will randomly pull the additional applications from the rest of your applications. If you have 151 approved applications on file as of October 1st in your SFA, 151 times 0.03 is 4.53. You round that up to 5, so you select 5 applications from your error-prone applications. And if you don't have enough error-prone, you're going to randomly pull the additional applications as necessary to meet that sample size. If you have 376 approved applications on file as of October 1st, 376 times 0.03 is 11.28. 11.28 rounds up to 12, and you're going to select those 12 applications from your error-prone applications. And if there aren't enough error-prone, you're going to randomly pull the additional applications to make up that number. Okay, what is error-prone, you ask? Great question. So error-prone applications are approved applications that fall within a certain threshold of the free and reduced price meal eligibility guidelines. It's often referred to as within $1,200 of the annual income eligibility guidelines or within 100 of the monthly income eligibility guidelines. But as you folks know that are responsible for approving applications, folks have different income frequencies that they report. And often they are reporting income frequencies that would not fall within that monthly or within that annual frame. So if you get an application and it has different income frequencies on it, so one household member receives their income monthly and one household member receives their income weekly, you must convert that up to the annual figure when you're approving the application. That makes it easy when you're looking to see whether or not that's an error-prone application. But if you get an application where they just report, twice per month income information, you don't have to convert it up to annual to figure out whether or not it's error-prone. You can use these threshold guidelines to make that determination. So I hope, per Rosie's free and reduced price meal class at Summer Institute and per our past instruction, that as you've been approving applications this year, you've been paying attention to see whether or not they are what we consider error-prone. The Arizona Department of Education came up with a really helpful tool that is the income eligibility guidelines with those error-prone thresholds on there. And I'm just going to show you guys that if you go to our free and reduced price meal webpage, we have a tool on there that shows you those thresholds to make it easier for you to determine whether or not an application is considered error prone. It's important to remember that error prone is an application that is free but could have almost been reduced, is within that threshold of being reduced, is approved reduced but was almost or within that threshold of being free, and reduced but close to having been denied. And again, these are all based on approved applications. Denied applications are not included in the verification process. So when you're marking your applications as to whether or not they're error prone, you can do it with like a little sticky tab or a highlight or some other way to notate that that application is error prone. So you have that pile ready to pull from when you're doing your sample size. Okay, so we talked about the confirmation official, and now we're going to talk about what they do. So once you have pulled your applications for your sample size, so if it said that you need to pull 3 applications, you pull them from your error-prone applications, and you luckily had enough error-prone applications to pull from, so all 3 are error-prone. The next step that you're going to do is to have that person that isn't your initial approving official look at that application to see whether or not it was approved correctly in the first place. Like, yep, I'm checking off that this is actually a free application. Yep, I'm checking off it's actually a reduced application. And Denise is letting me know that we have another question.
So if we are all CEP and provisions 2, except for one school, the total number of approved application pool is only coming from the one school. Is this correct?
So Denise was reading off a question that asked if they are CEP schools and Provision 2 schools and only one school isn't a CEP or Provision 2 school, then all of their approved applications will be coming from that one school. Is that correct? Yes, that's correct, as long as you are not in your base year of Provision 2 and that your Provision 2 schools do breakfast and lunch. Great, thanks. If when the confirmation official is doing the confirmation review and there is no change in status, like, yep, this is a free application, you would continue on with the verification process and the next steps. If the application was initially approved reduced, but they figure out, oh, something was wrong or human error or miscalculation or something, it should have been free, you change that student status immediately to free and then continue with the verification process. If when you're doing that confirmation review, the application changes from free to reduced, you don't change their status and you continue with the verification process. If that confirmation review results in that application changing from free reduced to paid, you notify the household of that change, and then you select another application for verification. So all of that is happening prior to actually notifying any households. You should also make an attempt to directly verify your applications. You can make sure that any of those students on your applications you selected for your sample size, if they're on your DC list, or you can fax our child nutrition office to have us check for you to see if they're on there, because then you're done with your verification of that application. So it makes it easy. Okay, so you have correctly figured out your sample pool, you've correctly determined your sample size, you've pulled your applications from your error-prone applications or selected, randomly selected additional ones to make up that number. You have done your confirmation review. You have made sure that if there were any changes, you follow those steps appropriately. If you need to replace your applications, you can do that once your confirmation review has been done. And then your next step is to actually notify the household. So you're going to use the verification notice letter from the free reduced price meal webpage of our Agency of Education website. And many of you are used to our materials being available in the Vermont Appendix. We no longer publish our documents as such. All of the templates and documents that you would have found in the Vermont Appendix are still available on our website. They're just available as standalone documents. When you are notifying a household of verification, you must provide them with a toll-free number that they can call if they have questions, and you must allow them to designate what's called a collateral contact. So this is a person who is outside of the household, who's knowledgeable about the household's circumstances and can confirm their income level or participation in an assistance program or categorical eligibility program. Once you've sent out that initial notice saying, hey, you've been selected as part of this process, we need you to submit documentation to validate what you reported on your application. Please submit it to us by this date. If they do not respond to your initial attempt to get that documentation, you are required to do one follow-up attempt. This can be done in the form of another letter, or in an email, or a phone call. If you do a phone call, you must document it in some way. So this is what I was talking about earlier with documenting all communication with households. Make sure that if you're calling to ask for that documentation that you're writing down on such and such a date, we made our follow-up attempt to the household and, date, time, even sign it if you want, just so you have that full record of that second contact attempt. So let's say, they respond to your initial request, or, that second attempt did it and they're sending you in backup documentation. What are acceptable sources of documentation? So if it's an income eligible application, they put down their income that they receive and they were approved based on that information. You need to get written documentation which contains the name of the household member, the amount of income received, the frequency that income is received, whether it's monthly or annual or biweekly, the date the income was received, and they must submit documentation for all income reported on the application. This is one of the things that we see a lot when we're conducting administrative reviews and looking at verification, is that households will often only submit like one household member's backup documentation, but on their application they reported two different household members' income information. So both of those need to be validated. Most often what we see in this scenario is like some kind of pay stub or paycheck that shows what they're receiving. So for categorically eligible assistance programs, The acceptable documents can include official letter or notice that the child or any household member is receiving benefits from the program. So like a SNAP letter from DCF. And then for other source categorically eligible programs, acceptable written documentation includes an official letter or notice or list from the appropriate state agency, program office, or coordinator or court. So I don't think you guys will be dealing with a lot of non-income based applications during your verification process because you are all required to be following the error-prone method. But if you don't have enough error-prone documentation, error-prone applications, you might end up randomly selecting an application that the household reported that they were participating in an assistance program or categorically eligible program. So you might get somebody that put down a case number that you didn't actually find on your DC list when you were doing your original application approval process. If somebody is submitting a letter from a SNAP or TANF, or for a SNAP or TANF, it must include the amount that they are receiving. And zero benefit households are not eligible for free meals. This again is sort of a special scenario that is covered in the eligibility manual, but it's a particular type of SNAP benefit, and it will say on the letter like zero benefits, and this actually does not confer free meal eligibility to the household. It's like a weird special scenario. So if the household's application indicates zero income, so this would be like if you're pulling a random application and the household indicated that they had no income, which is acceptable to approve for free meals. But if they're pulled during verification, you must request an explanation of how living expenses are met and may request additional written documentation or the information for the collateral contacts. And the collateral contact may be asked to document the duration and type of assistance that's provided to the household. The verification process is complete in basically 3 different ways. So when a household submits adequate and sufficient information to support their free reduced price meal status, so they sent in all the necessary backup documentation for all the people that were reported income or information on the application and there was no change, or the documentation that they submitted actually means that they need to change to paid status, or they don't respond after your 2 attempts and then their status changes to paid. For those folks that don't respond to your 2 attempts to get that information and you change their status to paid, and then like 2 months down the line in the school year, they submit an application again for free reduced price meals, they are subject to verification throughout the school year. So you have to continue to request that documentation from them until you can actually verify their status. Okay, verification for cause. So I said I would talk about this a little bit more. This is when you select what you consider to be a questionable application or an application with discrepancies and ask for backup documentation from the household. Once you've selected an application because you're verifying it for cause, you follow the exact same process that you follow for all of your other applications that you're verifying. You send them the same notice to the households, you collect same information, you give them that same follow-up attempt, it's the same template letters. There's nothing different about that process except for that initial selection of the application. And I really want to make sure that that's understood by folks, so that beginning part is the only thing that should be different. Page 99 of the eligibility manual talks specifically about this process, and there's a USDA memo that's called Verification for Cause in the School Meals Program that also goes into more depth about this process. So if you're thinking about this, it'd be really good for you to read that. Verification for cause may be conducted at any time during the school year. If you are attempting to verify for cause an application submitted by a school district employee, I really encourage you to consult your legal counsel prior to undertaking this process and make sure that you have all your ducks in a row before you go down this avenue. And again, once you've selected that initial application, you're treating the process the same as you would for the rest of your verified applications. The consequences of this process would be the same as those other verified applications. Okay, the verification report is in our online child nutrition application and claiming system, often referred to as Collier or CNP Web. And you are going to go to the applications tab and then select verification report and make sure it's the current year. I'm going to walk you guys through the verification report. I am just going to pick on Addison Northwest because they're at the beginning of the alphabet. And I know Kathy, if she's listening, won't mind, but just so that you guys can see what this looks like. So I know your screen might not look exactly the same as mine, but when you go in, you're going to hit applications, and then you're going to select verification report. The report, of course, for this year isn't open yet because we're not even started with verification. So I'm just going to click on last year's. The top is where you put the contact information for that verification official. It also includes the information about who needs to be completing the verification process and who needs to be completing the report. And remember, the only exemption for not completing a verification report are special milk folks. This first section is where you're kind of putting basic information about the breakdown of your school food authority. You're going to put your total number of schools, not including those residential childcare institutions if that's applicable, and then the total number of students. And this information, as it says on the top of this box, is as of the last operating day in October. Then if you have those RCCIs, you're including them in that next line. And then if you have RCCIs with day students in that next line, and then RCCIs with no day students. So for all of those folks except for Vermont Permanency Initiative, New England Current Hatton Homes, and Windsor County Youth Services, you're only going to be filling out this first line 1-1 in section 1. In section 2, this is where you're going to report if you have any schools participating in special provisions. We don't have any schools in Vermont that do Provision 3, but if you are participating in Provision 2 or in the community eligibility provision, this is where you'd be reporting those schools. So in 2-1, if you have anybody that's in their base year for Provision 2, 2-2, anybody not in a base year for Provision 2. And then the number of students. In 2-3, if you're participating in the CEP. And then in 2-4 and 2-5, I don't think we have anybody that fall into those special categories. Now in section 3, you are going to be reporting the number of students directly certified through SNAP. And this is not students that you've gotten a letter from DCF or from the household to say that they're SNAP, but students that you found on our direct cert list from the state. This is important because we have a federal mandate that we have a matching system, like a communication system, sufficient enough with our Department of Children and Families so that 95% of children that are in SNAP households are approved for free school meals. So this is really like an assessment of whether or not that mechanism and that system is working and that we're capturing the necessary number of children through that direct certification process. In 3-3, you're including students directly certified through other programs. So TANF or in Vermont Reach Up, FDPR, which is Food Distribution Program on Indian Reservations we don't have in Vermont. Medical aid is not applicable here. And then those documented homeless, migrant, runaway, foster, Head Start, pre-K even start by the appropriate officials, so like the homeless liaison or the migrant coordinator. And you're not including those SNAP students that you already reported above. Then in 3.4 is where you're going to put those SNAP students that you have a letter for, and making sure it's not a zero benefits letter. Okay. The next section 4, you are going to be reporting the information based on October 1st for the number of applications, and the number of students is going to be based on the last operating day of October. I know that's like a weird, confusing distinction that they would have those two different dates in there, but it's because the October 1st number is our, magic number for verification, and then the end of October is our magic number for all of our free and reduced data, like our free and reduced eligibility report that we get from your site enrollment report is based on the last operating day in October. So that's sort of why there's a confusing distinction there. Yeah, we have a question.
What is the date we use to determine how many directly cert as of October 1st?
Okay, we got a question, and I guess I don't fully understand it. It's what date do we use to determine the number directly certified as of October 1st? So in the section 3 that we just went over, when you're reporting the number of kids directly certified, it's going to be as of the last operating day in October. So that's not based on that October 1st date. Yeah. Oh, for your site enrollment report or for your CEP report or for your verification report, you're reporting different pieces of this free and reduced eligibility pie. When you're doing your site enrollment report, which is where we get your free and reduced eligibility data, if you are a regular Mule County claiming school, you're reporting as of October 31st. If you are a CEP school, in that site enrollment report, you're taking your claiming percentage and multiplying it by your current enrollment to get your free unpaid breakdown. If you are doing your community eligibility report, that's as of April 1st. And then when you were doing this verification report and reporting your number of kids directly certified, that's of the last operating day in October. I know that's confusing because those are a lot of different deadlines, but I think the reports do a good job of including the actual date that they need the information right there in that section so you can refer back to it. Okay, so in section 4, you are putting down your total number of applications that are free eligible. Your total number of applications that are free eligible based on a case number, free eligible based on income, and then reduced price eligible based on income. Then if you calculate total up the number of applications reported in 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3, that is your sample pool. Like those are your approved applications on file as of October 1st. And I, looking at this, should be able to multiply that by 0.03, round up, and figure out the number of applications that you pulled for your sample size. That's like a good way to check to see if you're pulling the right number or reporting the right information. Okay, next section, section 5, is asking some overall questions specifically about verification. So 5.2 was verification performed and completed. Yes, you completed it by that November 15th deadline. No, you completed it after the November 15th deadline, or no, you didn't do it at all. Then everybody is going to be selecting the standard method of error-prone verification, which is that first option in 5.3. In 5.4, you're going to report your total number of error-prone applications as of October 1st. And then 5.5 is where you're reporting your number of applications selected for your verification sample. That's your sample size. That's your 3% of your sample pool that you're pulling from those error-prone applications. So you potentially could have like 30 error-prone applications, but if your sample size is only like 4, you're just pulling those 4 from those error-prone applications. In 5.7, you're reporting if there was anybody that you directly verified. So remember, that's like checking your DC list from the state or faxing us to see if those kids are on our DC list. And 5.8 is where you're reporting the results of verification. So did they change? Did they stay the same? Did they not respond and then change to paid? So if you initially pulled a free categorically eligible application, you're going to be reporting that information column A. And that's only if you have to make up the difference between your error prone and the number you need for your sample size. Then if it was a free income application, you're going to report that information column B. And if it was a reduced price income application, you're going to report that information in column C. Then in VC1, you're going to report if you had any applications that you verified for cause as of the time that you are doing the verification process. If you are like verifying an application for cause like later in the year, you wouldn't be reporting that in this report. This is like a snapshot of a time frame. Okay, so as I mentioned, when we go out and do an administrative review, we're going to be assessing the verification process. We'll look to see that you established a correct sample pool and pulled a correct sample size, that you did that confirmation review and that there's the appropriate documentation of it, that you made your follow-up attempts to the household, you kept all your letters in your documentation, you followed the appropriate timeline, and that you completed the verification report correctly and on time. Some of the common verification errors that we find are that folks didn't do that confirmation review or they didn't document it. And I will just point out that, as I mentioned, that spot for it is at the bottom of the free reduced price meal application. So we're just going to look right here and you can see the determining official signature, the confirmation official signature, and the verifying official signature. So that determining official signature is always going to be filled out. It's the person approving the application. The confirmation official signature is going to be done either during the verification process if it's pulled or for all applications during the independent review process. And then when you're all said and done with verification and that application is good to go, you're going to sign off. The verification official is going to sign off there. So some of the other errors that we see are that folks didn't try to directly verify the application or they didn't document that attempt, that they didn't verify all of the income reported on the initial application, that they didn't complete their report correctly, that the benefit issuance list was not updated due to any changes during verification. So like if a status should change from free to paid during verification, but you never communicate that to the kitchen, you never input that in your system, and the kid continues to receive free meals and is being reimbursed at a free meal rate, that's a problem. And then you're not keeping copies of the letters you sent to the household on file. Like all of our child nutrition materials, you need to be keeping all documents on file for 3 years plus the current year. If we find errors in your verification report, or if we find errors when we conduct our administrative review, you will be required to participate in verification training as corrective action. We used to have what we called the ameliorative action list, which was a list folks were placed on due to verification errors, but we no longer publish that list as such, and the only corrective action required is that you participate in a verification training. So either in a Summer Institute verification training or in a webinar, live webinar, or you watch the recorded webinar. Yeah.
Will the PowerPoint be sent to the
Great question. So someone asked, will the PowerPoint be sent to those attending this webinar in the next 3 to 5 days? And yes, I will be happy to email out the PowerPoint even prior to the recorded webinar being available. This is my contact information. You can reach out to me if you have questions during the verification process. And then we have time now if folks have other questions that they want to ask, and Denise is going to relay those to me.